Good morning. Today we have the privilege of having Mr. Anthony DePalma with us on campus. Mr. DePalma was born on June 16, 1952 in Hoboken, New Jersey, and graduated cum laude from Seton Hall in 1975. Starting in 1986, Mr. DePalma wrote as a reporter as well as a foreign correspondent for the New York Times. During this time, he served as bureau chief for both Mexico and Canada, making him the first correspondent to hold this position. As bureau chief, Mr. DePalma wrote some of the most riveting journalism pieces that covered events such as the Zapatista uprising, a rebellion coordinated in response to the implementation of a 1994 NAFTA agreement, as well as a piece that covered the assassination of Luis Donaldo Colosio Murrieta. For the majority of Mr. DePalma's career at the New York Times, he focused on Latin American affairs, specifically those of Cuba and Mexico. In addition to writing biographic pieces, Mr. DePalma is a published author. His works of nonfiction include Here, a biography of the New American continent, The Man Who Invented Fidel, which has also been translated into 3 languages, and City of Dust, Illness, Arrogance, and 9/11. In addition to these accomplishments, Mr. DePalma has taught graduate-level seminars on international affairs at Columbia University and NYU. He was named a finalist for a 2007 Emmy for his work on the television documentary Toxic Legacy. In September 2008, Mr. DePalma became writer-in-residence at his alma mater, Seton Hall University, where he teaches classes on journalism and Latin American issues. He also continues to write about Latin America and the environment for the New York Times and other publications, and is a frequent lecturer on the Americas. We are very fortunate to have Mr. DePalma speak to us today. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Anthony DePalma to MBA.
Thank you so much. That was, you started right at the beginning, June 16th, 1952. Usually, part of being a writer is knowing where to start and where to end. That may be a little bit too early, but we'll give you that. It's great to be here. It's great to be here. It is my first time on campus, but I feel very comfortable and welcomed here by Mr. Joya and Mrs. Joya and all the faculty I've met, and all of you. It is a familiar setting for me. I'm a graduate of an all-boys high school, as are both of my sons, and we count among our closest friends the friends that we made while we were in those schools. So enjoy your time here, and I'm sure that you're forming relationships that will last for a lifetime. I wanted to talk to you this morning about journalism and about Cuba. But I wanted to start with something that happened a little while ago. I was sort of browsing through an online catalog and came across something that caught my attention. It was a new radio made inside, this was 2 guys from Brooklyn, made inside the top of a mason jar. So it was basically just this thick, the metal top of a mason jar and the antenna. And what made it unique was that they were promoting it and branding it as a radio that had the ability to only take in 1 station. So it was a radio, but it could only receive 1 station. And their idea was that that station would be tuned to your local public radio station. Seemed like a unique idea. They were selling a number of them. And I thought, well, this is something. And our local public radio station in New York City is WNYC, and it's quite a good station because it's in New York. Last Friday, for instance, they had Hillary Clinton come on talking about her book, What Happened, about the election, and taking questions from the public. So they were able to draw a lot of attention. On that morning, I heard their new branding campaign, which was, if you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC. I thought that was a pretty heavy First Amendment message for a public radio station. But as I looked around, I realized that lots of others were getting in on the same kind of campaign. If you watched the Academy Awards ceremony last February, you might have seen the first appearance of the New York Times' own new marketing campaign. On a white screen, black letters rolled out saying, "The truth is," and then a number of items listed. The truth is that alternative facts are lies. The truth is that a woman should dress like a woman. The truth is that the media is dishonest. And then finally, after all of this list of things that either you agree with or don't agree with, finally the last line said, "The truth is hard." In the same month, last February, the Washington Post threw in its 2 cents into this democracy in the media game when it coined a new slogan, the first in the 140-year history of the Washington Post. The slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." Sounds like something from a Batman movie. They tweeted about it in China, and it drew attention all over the world. Slate magazine suggested its own alternative slogans under the heading, 15 heavy metal albums whose titles are less dark than the Washington Post's new motto. And it didn't take long for late night TV to get into the act. Stephen Colbert, who lives in the same town as me in New Jersey, reported on his show that he had access to phrases that the Post had rejected, but they were good. Among them was, "Come at me, bro." And another was, "No, you shut up." Neither of those was accepted, but "Democracy dies in darkness" is on the top of the Washington Post every day. It's clear now that 2017 is going to go down in history for a number of reasons. Included among them is a change in the character of the American media, as well as a change in the American public's attitudes toward the media. Washington Post editors insisted that the paper decided to come up with a new slogan early in 2016, way before the November election. Nonetheless, the White House has changed the rules of the game for American media. And while falling just short of declaring war on legitimate news organizations in the country, the rhetoric coming out of Washington and reverberating from coast to coast on talk radio and right-wing news sites has played a role in severely diminishing the trust that a significant portion of the American people have in the media. At the same time, another large group of Americans has been turning to outlets like the Washington Post, the Times, and public radio in record numbers, hoping to find a voice they can trust. It's no surprise that this has caused a deep division in the country. On one side, you've got those who deride the news as fake, while on the other are those who see the press as a last line of defense of our democracy. While many of you are, well, I suppose all of you are too young yet to vote. Some. But those of you who are not yet there will be there soon. And we can only anticipate that the confusion and divisions that mark public debate today will grow more intense by the time you get to enter the voting booths and participate in this grand experiment known as democracy. The most important thought I can leave with you today is this: there's a big difference between fake news and news that challenges your beliefs. This dynamic has changed the public debate here. What is fake news? Fake news is 3,000 stories posted on Facebook by Russian troublemakers during the last campaign. Fake news is stories about candidates that are made up out of whole cloth and peddled with the pinpoint accuracy available through modern means of digital intelligence to exactly those people who accept such stories as the truth because, well, simply because such stories support what they already believe. There was a time not too long ago when it was essential for news organizations to reach as wide an audience as possible in order to sustain the cost of putting together and distributing a daily newspaper or producing a television newscast. To gather in the large numbers needed to generate ad revenues to cover those costs, news organizations refrain from taking extreme positions on issues and reporting them in a way that would alienate a large percentage of the potential audience. Right? They needed to draw in as many people as possible so that they could charge advertising based on those numbers. But the internet has changed all that. Lowering the cost of production and practically eliminating the cost of distribution, the web makes it possible, even profitable, to slice up the news market so thinly that it can offer readers, viewers, and listeners the option of receiving only the news that confirms the views they already hold, whether or not those ideas are accurate or truthful. This growing segregation of ideas has had a profound effect on the way the country thinks, and in some instances, on the way it acts. As a result, today it's possible to hear someone describe as fake news any account of events or issues that doesn't fit squarely into a particular political point of view. And this, as you can imagine, is quite dangerous. Now, just a few days ago, I came back from my most recent visit to Cuba, a country where there is only one voice in the official media, and where the official media is entirely controlled by the Cuban Communist Party. I arrived in Cuba on the first flight into Jose Marti International Airport after Hurricane Irma had battered the island and forced the airport to close for several days. While I was there, Cuba's newspaper and the national nightly news on television covered the recuperation efforts of the Cuban government as it worked to restore electricity and water to millions of Cubans who were affected by the storm. Nearly all stages of the recovery operations, including the collection of trash in the streets, was headed by Army officers, which in itself is an ominous advance in the militarization of the Cuban government, which we'll see more about next year. While the news gave some idea of the devastation that Cuba suffered, and in some places it was quite severe, and it included video interviews with a range of ordinary Cubans, everyone seemed to be pitching in to help in that recovery. And the general impression that the news gave was that operations were advancing rapidly to restore essential services. It was only when I came back to the United States last Thursday and was able to check with the independent Cuban press, which is blocked inside Cuba, but available to us here in the United States and elsewhere around the world, that I got to see the other side of the recovery. On YouTube, I easily found video footage of a street demonstration that had taken place in Havana while I was in Cuba. Hundreds of people came out in the streets demanding water and electricity. Not a single frame of the demonstration had been shown on Cuban TV. Not 1 second of those people angrily shouting, "Agua, luz," and demanding the essential services be restored. Likewise, I was quickly able to find other stories I knew nothing about or had heard about on the street, but never saw confirmed in the official press. The illicit sale of food and other emergency relief supplies on the streets while authorities looked the other way. The collapse of a building in Old Havana that left 2 women dead in the street. While I was in Cuba, I did hear criticism of the Cuban president, who did not visit the areas of devastation while I was there, and criticism of the ineffective response of the government. But those words were only uttered inside homes. The state-run newspapers only carried letters about the valor of the regime's recovery efforts and the Cuban people who helped in clearing the streets of debris. It's what happens when there's only a single voice. Now, as you know, I've had quite a bit of experience in journalism. I've spent 4 decades in journalism, and during that time, I've seen journalism transformed. And I hope later today when we meet with the journalism students, we'll have a chance to talk about this more and some of the changes and what it means for you in the future. My first newspaper article was set in hot lead type, and When I started working at a TV station, we shipped undeveloped film on Amtrak by handing it to a conductor in one station, and later I, as the youngest person in the newsroom, was sent to pick it up at the other end, handing the conductor $20 in an envelope and he handing me the undeveloped film. The first portable computers at the New York Times bureau where I worked were the size of suitcases. Yet when I was covering the conflict in Kosovo, I transmitted articles on a portable satellite phone the size of a lunchbox. When I was sent to Mexico as a foreign correspondent for the New York Times, they gave me 3 CDs containing articles from the Wall Street Journal about Mexico that was supposed to be my quick reference. That was all I had. There was no internet then. Now with my cell phone, I have access to all the articles ever published in the New York Times, along with a library full of data, anytime I need it from almost anywhere in the world, except Cuba. The scenes of the street disturbances in Cuba last week were recorded on cell phones, like mine and yours, and shipped out probably at a Wi-Fi hotspot in some park in Havana to supporters in Spain, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and they then put it on YouTube. The phones, these small marvels of technology, are actually powerful tools that can change history, and the hardliners in the Cuban government are playing a cat-and-mouse game with information and the internet, providing a bare minimum of access necessary to keep most people from demonstrating out in the streets, while also keeping a tight lid on access to truthful representations of events that reveal the weaknesses in the system. Here in the US, your cell phones are fire hoses of information and data. So much comes through so fast that we're often confused by it, which leads many to retreat to comfortable websites that seem to put this crazy world into some kind of order, doing so by playing to our fears and beliefs and ignoring or debasing everything that conflicts with those beliefs. My advice to you is simple. Know how it is that you come to know what you know. Instead of reading just aggregated news sites like Reddit or on Facebook that pick up information from other sources and recycle it, go to the original source, whether it be reporting on public radio or the commentary on talk radio. Don't rely on others to tell you what someone else is saying, whether that someone else is someone you side with or someone whose views contradict with your own. The bottom line is, I'm not going to buy that mason jar radio because I need more than one station to really know what's going on. Now I'll finish up here. This is not a plug for the New York Times, where I worked for 22 years, but the truth is hard. The truth is hard. Your generation has a great opportunity of having access to more information than has ever been available to anyone before you. But with that greater access comes responsibility. You have to work harder to get to the truth, to know which sources you can trust, to believe that what you read, see, or hear is an accurate representation of what happened. It's possible to get to the truth, but first you need to want to get there. And that journey to the truth is definitely worthwhile. Now, I failed to thank the band for una performance that was excelente, magnifico, extraordinario. You guys really nailed it. And thank you all for listening, and thank you for inviting me here.
Tony DePalma is an incredibly thoughtful individual, and we're fortunate to have him here all day. He's going to visit with a number of students, be in one of our Spanish classes, and he's going to speak again at 5 p.m. this afternoon, where he'll show a lot of imagery and pictures of his experiences in Cuba. So especially those of you going on that trip this spring break, I'd urge you to go to that and tell your families as well.